Hey everyone, welcome back to the Read Report. I'm your host, Nicole Ryan, and as always, we've got a lot to talk about this week regarding the Karen Read case. This past Wednesday, both sides returned to the courtroom for a critical hearing where Judge Beverly Cannone heard arguments on both sides regarding the defense's motion to dismiss. Now, Alan Jackson, Read's defense attorney, argued that the case should be thrown out due to extraordinary governmental misconduct. And one of his arguments for the dismissal is rooted in this key juror's dismissal. So basically, Alan Jackson opened up his argument by revisiting this key moment from Karen Read's first trial where a juror who was openly defense favoring, allegedly, in her expressions and her reactions during the first trial, was dismissed because of alleged misconduct. So this wasn't just your regular juror. This was someone who had appeared sympathetic to the defense throughout the trial, reacting visibly at different times. And when the issue of the alleged misconduct had arose, the defense was trying to press for details. They tried to press into the issue a little bit further. Who had reported this misconduct? Massachusetts State Police Lieutenant Fanning reported this. So Lieutenant Fanning allegedly had claimed that he had heard about the juror misconduct from an unnamed source, and there was no substantial evidence. According to Alan Jackson, the juror herself had denied any wrongdoing, and yet she was dismissed. But here's where it gets even more troubling. Lieutenant Fanning isn't just any officer. Lieutenant Fanning played a key role in the investigation against Karen Read. He personally interviewed multiple prosecution witnesses. He seized Read's phone months before the trial. He was part of one of the group chats with Michael Proctor, where Michael Proctor was boasting about searching for nudes on Read's phone. And yet, Lieutenant Fanning, according to the prosecution during the last trial, was the commander of trial security operations. So why would they have someone who played such a critical role in the investigation into Karen Read be in charge of the security for the trial? And why, isn't it interesting that Lieutenant Fanning, of all people, is someone who's reporting this alleged juror misconduct? So again, according to Jackson, when the defense tried to push for more information, perhaps even to investigate whether the misconduct claim was actually legitimate, the juror was already gone, dismissed. And that juror had sat throughout the whole trial and was again seemingly openly in favor of Karen Read, a defense-favorable juror. Come closing arguments, this juror just gets cut. This argument, according to Alan Jackson, combined with other instances of Commonwealth's misconduct throughout Karen Read's trial, such as the withholding of video footage from the Sally Port at the Canton Police Department, all of these arguments lead to the defense's motion to dismiss, arguing that Karen Read was denied her constitutional right to a fair trial because of all these different circumstances. And because of this, the case, they say, should ultimately be dismissed entirely. Now, the prosecution got their turn to argue, and prosecutor Hank Brennan got up there to speak, and he doubled down on defending Lieutenant Fanning. According to Hank Brennan, Lieutenant Fanning is one of the most conscientious and admired state troopers in Massachusetts. Karen Read's response? She dramatically snapped her head back, with her eyebrows raised, and flashed a sarcastic smirk to her family seated directly behind her in the courtroom. Now, why would Karen Read react like that? We know she's not one for hiding her facial expressions. What you see is what you get with Karen Read. So why would Karen Read react in this way when Hank Brennan said, Lieutenant Fanning is such a great, esteemed police officer? That could be because Lieutenant Fanning was on the chain with Michael Proctor, and he was technically Proctor's supervisor, and Proctor was never disciplined for openly texting his fellow colleagues, "I'm looking for nudes in Reed's phone." So could be that. That might have rubbed her the wrong way. Or could be something else. You see, Lieutenant Fanning was also recently tied to another high-profile case. And that's the Sandra Birchmore investigation. Now, for those of you who don't know the name Sandra Birchmore, I highly recommend you look into her case because it's really disturbing, but it also has a lot of the same key players in the Karen Reed case. Who was Sandra Birchmore? Why does this matter that Lieutenant Fanning was an investigator in her death? Well, brief backstory. Sandra Birchmore was a 23-year-old woman who was found dead in her Canton apartment in February of 2021. And Sandra Birchmore basically had the definition of a rough go. She was primarily raised by her grandmother, and at the age of 12, she joined this Stoughton Police Explorers program, which essentially was a program where if they were interested in learning about future careers in law enforcement, they could go to this Explorers program. And it was there at that Explorers program that young Sandra Birchmore met Officer Matthew Farwell. Officer Matthew Farwell was one of the program's instructors. He was a Stoughton police officer. And by the time that Sandra Birchmore turned 15, she and Farwell allegedly had a sexual relationship. He reportedly groomed her and essentially was having all these sorts of relationships with her when he was a full-blown man, and she was just this young, impressionable young woman. And so basically, their relationship went on for many years, on and off, and then it eventually resulted in Sandra Birchmore getting pregnant with Matthew Farwell's child in 2020. So basically, despite all the signs pointing away from suicide, namely, Birchmore was eagerly awaiting for the arrival of her child. She had a load of laundry going around the time her body was found. And Matthew Farwell was the last known person to enter her apartment Sandra Birchmore's death was ruled a suicide by investigators. Yes. One of those investigators being Lieutenant Fanning. So, despite all the mysterious circumstances of Birchmore's case, it wasn't until August of 2024, this past summer, when a federal investigation resulted in Matthew Farwell's arrest. Finally, he was charged with the murder of Sandra Birchmore. So when prosecutor Hank Brennan described this Lieutenant Fanning as a conscientious and admired law enforcement officer, it's no wonder that Karen Reed reacted that way. But will all of these arguments be enough? Will the argument that the prosecution withheld video footage from the Sally Port? Will the argument that Lieutenant Fanning was in charge of security operations and reported that alleged juror misconduct during Karen Reed's last trial that resulted in the dismissal of an openly defense-favoring juror, allegedly, coincidences and just true poor police work be enough for Judge Beverly Cannone to finally dismiss the case against Karen Reed? All these little patterns of misconduct, these little things that just, they pique your interest. Will all of this be enough for Judge Cannone to dismiss the case? I don't know. But as of now, she has yet to make her ruling. That's where we'll leave it for today's episode of The Reed Report. I've been really wanting to talk about the Sandra Birchmore case for a while, but I wasn't sure how to get into it, and I felt like I kind of had to talk about it during this case. If you guys like it, definitely give a thumbs up. I want to do a deeper dive into Sandra's case because it's one that's close to my heart and one that I feel like everyone knows about Karen Read. A lot of people know about Sandra Birchmore, but probably not as many people as should, because she had a really rough go, and it's only just in the last few months that it seems like we may finally get some justice for her and her unborn child. So that's it. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Read Report, and don't forget to follow us on Spotify, YouTube, Instagram. And as always, everything I say is ultimately opinion-based, and while I researched a lot of the things in these cases, I encourage you guys to do your own research, stay curious, stay questioning, and subscribe for ongoing coverage. That's it. I hope you guys have a great week, and don't miss out on Season 2 of The Read Report.